Shut up and sit down.
This week we've got the blood axes. Converted this guy up a little bit, added some bits to him. I had 4 of these set out and decided this one I would do as a blood axes one because there's plenty of flat armour for us to work on camo. It's also going to be a way of doing the death skulls. You simply wouldn't do the camo, that's the only difference, because we're doing blue camo on this. I thought I'd kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We've started with the Vallejo black primer as always, and the colour I don't use very often is dark Prussian blue by Model Colour. We're going to use this as the base for most of the fabrics and nearly all of the armour. It's just going to be a nice solid base coat. But we're going to use a wet palette a lot in this as well, as we did in the other videos, so build up those layers nice and subtly, bit by bit. Now we're going to switch to the Games Workshop range and use Macragge Blue. Really watered down and working from the bottom to the top and just glazing that up ever so slightly bit by bit. It will look patchy for the first few layers, but as you build it up you'll start to get a really nice blue transition. Looks quite vibrant, but we're going to tone that down in a bit with some washes, so I wouldn't worry about it. And the washers mute everything and tone them down a lot, so you want them looking more vibrant than you would think before the wash goes on. Now we're going to put in the wet palette a little bit of Old Orf Blue by Games Workshop, and again you've now got a template for your highlights, so we're just going to start working those up bit by bit with the brush. Just starting a little bit lower down, and remember when glazing you can go over both of those colours in the transition to help bring them up, because you'll use the bottom layers as a filter and a tone for the rest of it. So you can go over like 2/3 of the model with the next highlight. Now to start putting in some patches, we're just going to use Dark Reaper, that's a Games Workshop paint as well. As you can see at this point you could probably just start leaving the blues alone if you wanted to do the death skulls instead of the blood axes, and I'll probably mention later on what other tones you put on to start bringing those up a little bit more. So if you're doing the death skulls, just skip forward a bit because we're going to do a lot of camo now with the Dark Reaper and everything else. Now we've got some rough patches for the Dark Reaper. We're going to use Thunderhawk Blue. I'll just go over those. The reason we're doing this is to give a nice solid base for these colours to go over, and also the base colour that we've put down for each bit of camo pattern is also going to work as a nice template, and we can neaten it. Before we get too settled into the video, yes, it's a plug by one of our local game shops, Composite Games. They offer 15 to 25% off. The website address is in the description, and if you follow that link and use the code Bigmeksarmy on checkout, you get an extra 5% off, so that's 25% off all your hobby supplies. Go check them out, and you can also buy our products on that shop as well. Just keep the plug short and sweet. Go check those out, and let's get straight back into the video. Up as we go. You want to be quite generous with the size of these patterns that you make, because if you make them too small, you're really going to cut your double the workload that you've got to do basically. Now we're going to mix Rust Grey into some Thunderhawk Blue and just start working at the top areas of the model. Anywhere where the camo pattern would reach a top area, we're going to blend again using glazing techniques from the underneath to the top. If you guys have got an airbrush, you'll find this easy. Use this same paint technique, but just keep using Tamiya tape and an airbrush. You'll have it done in no time. But I wanted to show everyone how to do it with a brush, because not everyone's got an airbrush. Now to base the next colour, we're going to use Skavenblight Dinge. See, our Thunderhawk is our mid-tone, we've got our Prussian Blue as the dark tone, and the Skavenblight Dinge is going to start building up our really light grey tone. Sort of a white tone, but we're not going to be using whites here because too vibrant, and when we put washes on them it's going to change the tone of the white. So instead we're going to stick to an off-white, which is usually what me and Andy will do, because once you go to white there's nowhere to go with it. Now we're going to use Sky Grey by Model Colour and go over those again. Now we've got a good solid base. And these particular set of patterns here need to start touching the other parts, so they're joining ever so slightly. So this is how you get your actual camo pattern look. You don't want them all separate and splotted on, they need to be touching. If you do them all splotted on, it just looks like blobs of paint all over and random patterns. You want to start covering up that original Prussian blue that we've done. Now we're going to use black grey by model colour and bring in the darkest of the colours. This eventually will be the black on the armour and on the camo pattern, but for now we're just sticking with the black grey so that we can wash it down and tone it down later. Again, we're now joining all those other colours together by mixing this pattern in between them all. And for now, the armour is pretty much done. So for the skin, guys, we're going to use Warboss Green by Games Workshop. And for each of these orc tutorials, we have managed to get a different orc skin and different armour effects. So definitely check the rest of those videos out as well, guys, because we've come up with a lot of different colour schemes for these orc skins, and I'm sure there'll be something you enjoy. Now we're going to use black by Game Colour, and we're going to thin that down. The Game Colour black is actually an airbrush paint, and it's quite thin already, so we're just going to start working that to the underneath of the black grey. We'll glaze that down like a sort of a wash, so only the pronounced parts of the model have the black grey left on them. This is going to add the shape to all the legs and all the other bits of the armour that we've got going on. Quite time consuming, but the end result seems to be worth it. Now we're going to use Rust Grey as a highlight mixed with Thunderhawk, no, to highlight the Thunderhawk blue. Just Rust Grey on its own. So each of those chips is getting several different layers of paint. Just bringing them out so they're really pronounced, and what it should end up looking like is there is a strip of light going across the top of all those like armour plates there, and all the camo patterns blend accordingly towards that. Now we're using null oil and medium, and this is really thin, and we're going to do this at least 3 times if you want to start getting the tones and the shades to work right. Starting from the midsection of his trousers and pulling those down. Not pulling his trousers down, that sounded weird. Pulling down the oil wash from the top of the trousers to the bottom. And like I said, we're going to do that 3 times, possibly even more than that. Just to start building up the darkest areas at the recesses and leaving the pattern alone so it doesn't get too faded. As you can see, it takes a long time to do this. I wanted to leave this bit in to show you where we're up to. And once we're done with this, we're going to start moving on to the shirt. But you can see the underneath of that starting to look shaded, and it's getting in those gaps just in the right way. So now we're going to use Baneblade Brown or Heavy Brown, which is an extra opaque by Game Colour. I ran out of Baneblade Brown, so I'm technically using Heavy Brown, and you can honestly just use Baneblade Brown. It's almost identical in colour. And we're going to use that to start picking out the shirt. Because I was going to do him all blue, and at this point there is so much blue on the model, I decided I need to break him up a little bit. Didn't want him completely camo pattern and completely blue. And as you can see, that's really setting off all the camo patterns now. Now we're going to add Dark Rust by Panzer Aces into the Baneblade Brown, or in this case, Heavy Brown, and start glazing downwards. We're going to start bringing that down because it's a darker shade, and we'll just bring that down to those recesses. Then we're going to start bringing the Heavy Brown and Baneblade Brown back up to the top with a little bit more of the Baneblade Brown in it. That way we should get a nice transition from a dark dirty colour at the top to a light where the actual light would be hitting the top of the model there. Then we're going to add Carrick Stone into our Baneblade Brown, and again carry on working on the top of that shirt. With all these details that we've got going on with the armour, then we really need to bring out the highlights of everything else so they actually stand out enough. So you want to glaze towards the edges of the shirt and towards the top of the shirt because of the shape. Hopefully we'll be getting some new orcs by now, and they'll be more pronounced because the back of these always looks pretty flat. Now we're going to use straight carrot stone, and we're going to keep glazing that up. There's barely anything left on this brush. We'll probably have to bring out a video completely just about glazing on its own, see if we can get that out for you. As you can see, we've got a good transition there from the bottom to the top. I'd recommend not putting the banner on the back as it gets in the way, but I will fix all that up off camera. Now we're going to use Army Painter Strong Tone. Nice smooth motion with the brush. It's a good colour to have. If you haven't got this colour already, you should definitely have it. It's like another version of Agrak's Earthshade, but it's not such a bright reddish brown. It's not as warm. It's a much more muted brown, and definitely get this for your collection. Again, that's watered down. We're going to build that up so it lands in those recesses on the side of the shirt, making those pronounced, and making the bottom half much more dirty and shaded. Now we're going to start working back to the skin again, guys, and I'm using Lauren Forest by Games Workshop. Now this is quite an extended bit of footage, seeing as it's the first highlight that we're putting on this particular orc. And for those who haven't seen these videos before, I want you to see the glazing building up, as there's barely any paint on this at all. It's all done with a wet palette. You want to start from the recesses of the skin to the tops, and this is still the same colour. Just after like 3 or 4 layers you start to get this sort of tone. It's definitely worth spending your time doing this. You want nothing left on your brush from the wet palette, so it's just ever so slightly damp. And then just slide your brush across the top, going from the shadows to the recesses, because that's where most of the highlights will end up. And you end up with a result similar to this one, which really looks a lot more natural than just painting the muscles in a block colour, and it also helps it blend a lot better when we put a wash on. And then you just build it back up again. The skin, all in all, you're going to spend like an hour, 2 hours doing the skin if you really want your knobs to look good. Now after that, after all that glazing we've done, we're going to use a Athonian Camo shade and a Drushi Violet mix, which makes your your Athonian Camo shade ever so slightly warmer as a colour, and that's what we're going to use for the skin. We're going to make sure that gets into all the recesses. It is watered down quite a bit. We don't want to drown out all the highlights we just spent time doing. Now when I said you'll spend an hour, 2 hours doing the glazing for the skin, I meant all in all, not just for that layer. It shouldn't take you that long. Then we're going to go back to the Lauren Forest, as we've got a nice rich transition now, and the skin's got a good depth to it. This technique you'll find in a lot of our videos. We'll glaze up several layers, put down a wash, then go to the last layer, start glazing it back up again. As you can see, now we've put that wash on and the underneath layers ever so slightly toned. The effect of the glaze is really starting to take off, and it's really starting to make the skin very three-dimensional, and it's putting the highlights exactly where we need them. Then we're going to switch to Strachan Green by Games Workshop and start highlighting up again, doing the same thing. And at this point you can see exactly what we've been doing with the skin. It's becoming very, very pronounced, very three-dimensional, and it's full of character. It's completely up to you where you draw the most highlights, and that will draw the most attention. I tend to go for the nose and the brow, bottom of the jaw, top of the biceps. It really pronounces those faces. Orc faces are just chock full of character, and they're so much fun to paint. Unlike the small Space Marine faces, you can do a lot more with an orc face. Now I'm going to use Tusker Fur to fill the entire inside of the mouth. Obviously you want to be very careful not to touch any of the greens with this and muck them up, but we're going to paint the teeth and the entire inside of the mouth with this colour. And the reason for that is when we do the teeth, we don't want a black hard line where the teeth start. We want the teeth to look like they're protruding from the gums. Next is Flat Earth by Model Colour, which is what I'm going to use for all the leathers pretty much. It's been a bit difficult doing these videos. I've had to come up with 4 different leathers and 4 different skin tones, just to make sure each of these orc videos is completely different to all the others, using different paints, different techniques, so it's not repetition. Now I'm going to use brown sand by Model Colour, and that's going to be the highlight for this. Sort of a desert colour. If it was military gear, it looked like desert gear, which I thought would complement the randomness of the blood axes themselves with all their military gear. Just make it mix and matched rather than having lots of different camo patterns added to it. And next we're going to use Flat Earth and Dark Rust by Panzer Aces, and we're going to thin that down to a wash consistency. So we've got the base colour in there, but we've also got a darker colour. What that's going to do is put the darker colour in all those recesses, but also use, it's also going to blend both those other 2 colours, the highlight and the shade colour, together, and sort of give a 3-way sort of tone to this thing and really make it look much more 3-dimensional. Then for the mouth, I'm going to start going in with a Reclam Flesh shade, just to add some colour to that Tusker fur and some depth. You can really use any sets of colours you want for the mouth, but this is just the one I did for this particular model. I find it's easy to start with a wash for these because there's a lot going on in the mouth, and you really only want to use small highlights rather than being in there painting every little detail. Then to finally tone those boots and all those leathers down a little bit more, we're going to use an Agrax Earthshade wash, watered down. And I'm basically just letting most of the washes do the work for me with these bits of leather. There wasn't much in the way of highlighting. As you can see, those undertones underneath that we've put down, they really show through with a lovely blend and transition. Always be really careful when handling washes and don't put too much on, because you don't want it to pour off onto all the hard work that you've been doing. Now we're going to start painting the blades on the claw, which will be black by Model Air Metallic. This is quite a smooth paint, so you don't need to water it down too much, but you will need to put 2 or 3 coats on just to be sure you've got a nice even coating. I think this is the metallic colour we use for the entire model, if I remember right. Yeah, I believe it is. And then we're going to highlight that up using Lead Belcher, because black is a black metallic, and it looks like a Lead Belcher that's had a null oil on it. It just saves us putting a wash step on. And don't forget to do all the buckles and all the little studs in his belt buckles. There was a lot of those. Once you start painting them, you realise how many little bits of metal trinkets the orcs actually have on them. But just take your time, you don't need to do them in too much detail. And now we're going to use Steel by Model Air Metallic, because we really like the Model Air Metallic range. I'm going to highlight the tips, the very tips of all the metallic parts that we've just done with this colour. For a change, you know, I thought maybe the Blood Axes would actually have some sharp gear, seeing as they believe in strategy and order. Maybe they take care of their gear as well, so we've gone for a much more vibrant metal on these guys. Then of course we're going to wash all that down with a null oil. That's just a standard practice really, just to make sure there's a bunch of depth in there. Very watered down again guys, there's really not much to that null oil at all. It's just to make sure we've got in all those recesses so they're dark enough. Although we'll be putting an oil wash on later, and that will definitely get in all those recesses, making them black, solid black. Now back to the mouth, I'm going to start picking out the tongue and the gums using Tusker Fur again, just over the Reclam Flesh Shade wash that we did. A few gums at the bottom next to the teeth, you just need to brush those ever so slightly with your paintbrush. You don't need to pronounce them too much. Just be really careful around all the green skin that you've been doing. And next we're going to mix a bit of Cadian flesh tone into the Tusker Fur and just start bringing out the same spots again, but a little bit higher up. I could have spent some more time glazing the tongue, but I don't know, it's really annoying after doing this much work just painting a mouth. My advice would probably be use orcs with a mouth shut. It's just easier to paint them that way. That's something I remember for future videos. Now we're going to start picking out the teeth, and we're not going to base coat them in anything particular. We're just going to use Zandri dust over the colours we've already got down there. You want to gently feather these paints backwards and make sure it looks like the teeth are actually protruding from the gums. You don't need a solid hard line. You can just paint over them gently, and usually they'll blend into the gums and look quite natural as well, especially if we add an extra wash or something to these. Now we're going back to the skin to do a little bit more work, and we're taking the Strachan green that we previously did, and we're adding Ogren Camo, which is not one I usually use, but I wanted to bring this skin up to a much lighter tone than usual. Still using those same glazing techniques, just lots and lots of layers. This time we're only really working to the fine points of the muscles. As you can see, that definition is really coming on now. And you guys, you can do this as well, it's just a case of practicing. I'm going to use Warplock Bronze for the logos because I've used bright metallics and other stuff, and I think for a change, Warplock Bronze just changes everything up a little bit. It sort of matches, but doesn't stand out too much. I think the only logo this particular orc has on it is the one on its gun, but we're going to put washes and stuff on that, bring it out a bit. And the bullet casings were done in Balthazar Gold by Games Workshop. They really didn't need much work either. They were already pretty much black from the prime, because we've been doing one piece at a time rather than spraying airbrush or just blocking in colours. So they're going to go Balthazar Gold. Keep that paint thin because Games Workshop paint metallics tend to be quite thick, so do a couple of layers for that. And then for the tips of the bullets, I was using Hammered Copper by Game Colour, which is a really nice reddish metallic colour. Just be careful not to get anything on, anything else. I keep saying that, but if you're following this tutorial, you're following along, you've put in a lot of work, so don't rush anything. I used Morning Fang Brown for the base for the skull on the back, and again, we're going to use more glazing techniques, but I'm just using Zandri dust very softly over the whole skull. Starting at first with the most pronounced edges, and then when that dries you work backwards a bit, covering a bit more of the Morning Fang into the Zandri dust, and that over time is going to build up the Zandri dust layers where you really wanted them. It's sort of how the glazing technique works. And once you've got a nice even coat of that, I'm going to add Ivory by Model Colour into the Zandri dust. As you can see, I've left some of that Morning Fang showing in the deepest recesses, and start glazing the edges again. I do enjoy glazing, although it is quite time consuming to do, but the results you get are usually worth it. And there's quite a lot of details on this banner, and it's a technique for this, or a colour scheme at least for this skull I've not tried before, but I am becoming a fan of Ivory by Model Colour. Now we're going to tone that down with an Army Painter Strong Tone. As you can see, we're going to start from the top of the skull, work it into the recessed areas, but don't let it pull too much, because when something pulls, when it's a wash, you get this really dark matte colour, and it really stands out a lot. So just keep your washes nice and smooth, make sure you keep moving them around so they don't pull. On the teeth, I'm then going to jump to using the Shabti Bone, which is the classic really, to go over Zandri dust with the Games Workshop paints. It's only really the tips, starting about halfway down to the tip, just bringing those out a little bit more. Don't forget to do the underneaths. then I'm going to do Balthazar gold on the barrels because it will complement what's around his neck, and I didn't much want to do them solid silver. I wanted them to stand out a little bit. There's already a lot of silver metallic on here, and we're just going to edge highlight, well, glaze the very tops of the skull, skull glyph insignia. Then we're going to mix pink horror into the tusk of fur and really start picking out that tongue a little bit so it stands out more than the gums. Because if it was the same colour as the gums, it'd be hidden there. You'd see the whole mouth as a whole, but you wouldn't see the details on the tongue or anything else. And you can bring that up as high as you want. You could probably just take it all the way to pink horror if that's what you wanted for a more cartoony skin look. Then the strings are all being painted in dryad bark. I'm trying to keep the strings simple at this point, and I'm trying to keep everything on the palette matching. There's some string on his back there, there's a couple more bits of string on something else, I'm sure there is. Ah, that was it, all the laces on his gloves. Then what we're going to do is go over the dryad bark using Rakar flesh. And that's really going to start pulling everything else together. Which I think works really well for a lace against that particular leather type. And since it's the colour we're using for string, I've also done it for the bullets around his neck that are on a string, and the string on the horn on the back as well. That's also been done in the same scheme. Then we're going to tone those together using an Agrax Earthshade wash. And also including the bullets are going to be done in an Agrax Earthshade wash. And some of the metallic work silvers are going to have a little tone of watered down Agrax Earthshade wash just to start toning it all together, because it did still look very clean. And then as we're closing to an end and we're nearly finished, I decided to go back for straight Ogryn camo and really pronounce that face. Bring it together, just watered down Ogryn camo, just glazing up those final bits, the tops of the ears, the nose and the eyebrows, the very tops of the muscles, and yeah, at this point he looks pretty decent. I'm quite happy with the way he is. I could have probably used a few more washes on those on the armour, but we'll see how it looks after I've given him an oil wash. And next was something I didn't think I'd do. I'm going to edge highlight all the camo pattern stuff with a single colour, and we're just going to use Ivory by Model Colour, and surprisingly this worked really well as long as the paint was thin. It allowed the colours underneath to show through ever so slightly, giving us a solid highlight on everything, but there's a slight variation in the tone of it depending on what bit of camo it's gone over, and that technique I'm really chuffed with. I'll probably start using it for some more different types of camo. Well, finally there you have it guys. I know it's been a long video, but there's one Blood Axe knob all painted up in blue camouflage. If you wanted to do the Death Skulls, you would just leave the camouflage off and still use the same colour scheme. That's a bit of both there. I kind of enjoyed painting this one, although the camo can be very tedious at times. Learnt a few new bone techniques and colours like that Ivory for Model Colour. I'm going to start using that a bit more. So if you start collecting orcs and you're going to do blood axes, I hope this really helps you out. And we have a lot more videos coming up. We do have speed freaks once we get our hands on the new kits, and also some snake bites as well. So if you haven't hit subscribe already, hit that subscribe, and don't forget to like the video and also share with your friends, because every share helps us out. It lets people know what we're doing. We've got a bunch more videos coming up, so we'll catch you in the next one, and that's all from us. Thanks for watching.